Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a different video than I normally am filming, and this is going to be a discussion of my President's Reading Challenge, which some folks have asked me to give an update on. And for some reason, I thought that I had given an update on this project a little more recently than I have. But the last formal standalone video, which I gave an update on my President's Reading Challenge, was from 5 years ago. So it's been a while, and so I feel like it is appropriately time to talk about where I'm at with the President's Reading Challenge. So what is this challenge? This is a challenge that I started back in 2012, and it is basically reading through a biography of each president in chronological order. So starting with George Washington and ending with Joe Biden, if I were to finish today. I will not be finishing today, spoiler alert, and just trying to read at least one biography from each of those presidents. So I started in 2012, so it's been over 10 years, and I'm only on FDR. I just finished my biography of Franklin Delano Roosevelt yesterday. So that's where we're at. So let's talk about that first. So I have been reading FDR by Gene Edward Smith. This is a very chunky biography, although I have read chunkier biographies, and this is an excellent example of a presidential biography. It is interesting and engaging. It is focused on FDR as the person and doesn't get bogged down in sort of all of the other stuff that's going on around him, although you do get views of all of that stuff. But there was a lot going on in FDR's presidency. And it does talk about FDR as a child up through pretty quickly, doesn't get bogged down in his younger years and his years as governor and his, initial entry into politics, and then really focuses for the most part on his presidency, which he served 4 terms, actually 3 terms, and started a 4th term when he passed away. But like, for example, it doesn't get bogged down in the details of D-Day. It mentions it. It talks about his decision of which general to place in charge of the invasion of Europe and why he made that choice. So it touches on those historic events, but it doesn't get bogged down in talking in detail about those historic events. And I think presidential biographies can sometimes do that. If there's been some really huge event that happens in a presidency, it's awful easy for the author to get distracted and go off down that rabbit hole. But this author stays on track and keeps things focused on FDR himself. So this is an excellent example of what I'm looking for in a presidential biography. This was a 5-star read for me. However, I am also a little bit extra with my presidential reading, and so I will not be done with just the one biography of FDR, because I also have on my TBR, to be read, I have No Ordinary Time, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, The Home Front in World War II by Doris Kearns Goodwin. I've read other books by Doris Kearns Goodwin. I think she's an excellent historian, and so I'm excited to try this one. And then I have a biography of Eleanor herself, Eleanor by David Michaelis. And this was all the rage a couple of years ago. It was up for some awards. It was a New York Times bestseller. And I am a big fan of Eleanor Roosevelt. I admire her greatly. I think she had a very difficult road to travel in her marriage, and she dealt with that. She had a lot of personal morality, and she was very principled, and she probably wasn't a very easy person to be around either, but she really had stuck to her things that she believed in and was willing to work really hard to make changes in our world. And so I'm very excited to read a biography of Eleanor. And then I have 2 more volumes of Eleanor's newspaper columns. When I had already read 1 volume of this, there are 3 volumes total of these collections. My Day, this is volume 2, the post-war years. And these were the columns that she published in, I think there was a Philadelphia newspaper. And then it became syndicated, and they ran all over the country, and they went on for decades. So this is 1945 to 1952, and these are her columns Volume 3, First Lady of the World from 1953 to 1962. So I'm going to read all of those books before I move on to the next president in the list chronologically, which is Truman. And I will be reading the David McCullough biography of Truman, which I am super excited for. I've been wanting to read this for so long, and I'm so excited that it's almost time. It is a chunker of a book, but David McCullough is an excellent historian, as most of you know, I'm sure. So that's what I do. I read a biography, and there are a couple of different websites that I use to help me choose the biography that I want to read. I'm looking for a readable biography that gives a whole picture of the president. I want something that looks at their personal lives, their personalities, and not just like a chronological recitation of events that happened in their life. I mean, sometimes you have to read a biography like that of a president because there aren't any other choices. Like, especially not so much now that I'm into the modern presidents, but when I started the project and was reading through the earlier presidents, like the founding fathers, the first 5 or 6 presidents, lots of biographies on those fellas. But you get up into the 1800s, and there are certainly some presidents that have a paucity of biographies written about them. And it's difficult to find one that was just, was more than just a chronological recitation of the facts of their lives. So this shelf behind me that's been on display this whole time are the biographies that I've read for the President's Reading Challenge. There may be some presidents missing from this shelf because I wasn't always able to get a physical copy of a biography for a president, so I would have to borrow from the library, or I've had to listen to audiobooks or read ebooks. So there are a few presidents missing from this list, but the very first biography I read for this project was the classic, I would say, of the genre by Ron Chernow. This is Washington, a biography. This is also an excellent, excellent biography. Ron Chernow is like top of the game when it comes to these types of biographies. They're almost always really chunky. They're almost always written by men. And so I really treasure the biographies that I can find that are written by women because there's just so few of them out there. For whatever reason, women just don't tend to write these types of biographies. So I have all of these here as references. I will say, like these ones here, there are a bunch in this style, and this is a series of books called The American Presidents. They're very slim biographies, usually less than 200 pages, or right around 200 pages. Yeah, this one's about 160 pages. And these are written by various different authors, and they all sort of look the same. Got Franklin Pierce here and Zachary Taylor. I've got William Henry Harrison and Martin Van Buren. So you can get those and read about a president, and it's not as much of a time commitment if that's something that you're concerned with, but they are very much just a chronological ordering of the facts of that person's life. So that isn't really what I'm looking for. I really like the context around the person. I really want to know how they interacted with their families, with the people that they chose to surround themselves with in their jobs, how the community or the country at large viewed that president, what were the main issues of the day at the time when they were alive. That is all really interesting to me. And I have learned a tremendous amount about American history and even world history from reading these American president biographies. And the one thing I think that my big takeaway lesson from this whole project has been like the more things change, the more things stay the same, right? I think that the thing that I've learned is that when you think something that's happening in American politics in the present day, that it's somehow unusual or it's never ever happened before, I will tell you that very often, in fact, most of the time, it has happened before. Like, for example, a lot of people think that Donald Trump is a very singular presidential candidate and that there's never been anybody like Donald Trump run for president before. And that is true in some respects. But I would submit to you Andrew Jackson as a case in point. Andrew Jackson was Donald Trump before Donald Trump was born, and he had very many of the same personal political style and foibles and the same message sort of in general, although instead of immigrants, he was raging against American Indians. So, you know, there's a lot there to compare between Andrew Jackson and Donald Trump. So, like, in case you're, like, really freaking out that everything that's happened in the last 20 years in American politics is somehow, like, the sign of, like, that everything is falling apart, which it may well be. I mean, I'm no predictor of the future, but I will say that probably something that's really bothering you about this has happened before in history. We're really bad at remembering what's happened before in history and learning from those examples. So I'm not going to go through every book that I've read in the Presidential Reading Challenge so far. There's just too many of them, but suffice it to say, I try to get through 3 or 4 presidents in any given year. And I feel like that's a good pace. I don't want it to be my only reading. I want to mix in my presidential biography reading with the other things that I'm reading. So I try to keep it mixed up that way. So if I get through 3 or 4 presidents in a year, I feel pretty good about it. Some years I don't get through that many for whatever reason, like the year that I read the Teddy Roosevelt biography. So those are here. So there was a 3-volume set of the Teddy Roosevelt series. These are written by Edmund Morris, and it starts with Theodore Rex, and then the rise of Theodore Roosevelt, and that's not it. Oh, here it is right here. Sorry, I had the last one in hardcover. This is Colonel Roosevelt. So these all come together as volumes 1, 2, and 3 and describe the entire life of Teddy Roosevelt. Fascinating president, like really interesting character. And he was really fun to read about. So I enjoyed reading that trifecta of a biography. So that is in general the President's Reading Challenge and how I approach it. Like I said, I use a couple of different websites to help guide me when I'm picking a biography. There's a couple of different people who have been running websites as they do this same challenge and describing and documenting all of the different biographies that they read for each president. I mean, some of these folks have been absolute completists and reading every biography ever written about a particular president. I'm not going to go that far. I feel like I'm being pretty thorough as it is. So yeah, that's the general gist of it for this project. I hope that answers some of your questions. If you've been interested to know what this President's Reading Challenge was all about, I definitely recommend it as a project. Just, you know, be kind to yourself and don't try to rush it. Take your time with it. There's a lot to be learned from reading these types of books. And I have very much enjoyed my time spent on this project, and I look forward to continuing on, especially now that I'm in the modern era with these presidents. There's a lot to come that I'm very interested in reading about. So that's it for today. I hope you're all doing well and finding some great books to read. I will talk to you later.